I keep replaying that night in my head, an infinite, sickening loop. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing exactly when the impact is coming, but being utterly powerless to stop it. What kind of man am I? What kind of friend? What kind of partner? These questions have become the only music in the dead silence of my apartment. A silence that used to be filled with her laugh thought it was just another Monday night hang. The kind we'd had since we were kids, a ritual baked into the calendar, cheap beer, loud arguments over sports, and that familiar, comforting scent of stale pizza and misplaced nostalgia. We're all 31 now, give or take, except for Dave who's 32. We've been a pack since we were trading Pokemon cards, a fortress of male camaraderie. But a fortress can become a prison in a blink. And I'm just now realizing I've been locked inside a version of myself that was too comfortable, too blind, and maybe, just maybe, too cowardly. I look at the empty space on the sofa. The cushion's still molded from where Maya sat a few weeks ago. For months. That's all we've had. For spectacular months that felt like the first time the world truly shifted into color. Maya. She's 25. A whirlwind of sharp wit and gentle hands. And yes, she has a visible physical disability. It affects her gait, that's all. It's a part of her. Like her fierce love of obscure jazz or the way she tilts her head when she's listening intently. It is never, for one single second, define our relationship, our connection, or her confidence. She carries herself with a grace I could only envy. I brought her to meet the boys a few times. Because that's what you do when you know you've found something real you integrate. You show off your treasure. I thought they loved her. They were cordial, polite, even charming. Now, I see it for what it was, a performance. A temporary truce before the hunting season began. That night, the conversation had been normal, even dull. We were arguing about the playoffs. Then, Mark, the loud one, the one who always has to push the envelope, leaned in. I remember the exact tilt of his head, the smirk that crawled onto his face like a grub. So, John, he said, his voice dropping an octave, we need the details, man. Have you two? You know. Then the gymnastics. My stomach dropped, a cold, heavy stone. I felt the heat rise in my neck. It was crude, of course, but that's them. They're a bunch of perpetual adolescents who treat human connection like a foreign language. I'm the only one in the group who's ever successfully navigated a relationship. For longer than a month. They don't date. They don't commit. Their romantic experience is confined to dating apps and video games. So, I figured it was just pathetic envy disguised as locker room bravado. I tried to shut it down. Seriously, guys, I'm not commenting on that. You wouldn't ask a married couple that, would you? I thought that would be the end of it. It should have been the end of it. But the darkness, the rot I hadn't seen in them for years, it needed sunlight to grow. And they didn't stop there. That was the first prick, the initial invasion of privacy. What followed was an act of pure, distilled cruelty that makes my hands shake even now. I remember Ben, the quiet one, the one I thought was different, trying to stifle a laugh before he added a comment about her legs. And then Dave, God, Dave, my oldest friend, he took it further. He threw out a grotesque, sexualized joke about her disability itself. A joke that reduced her incredible strength, her battle, her very being, to a punchline for their cheap, toxic amusement. And they laughed. They didn't just chuckle. They roared. An ugly, guttural sound that echoed in the small space, bouncing off the walls of my own home. A place I had always considered safe. It was a pack mentality, a feeding frenzy, fueled by ignorance and fear of anything that deviates from their narrow, pathetic norm. I didn't join in. I couldn't. I felt the blood drain from my face, a sudden, horrifying coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. Disgust. It wasn't just discomfort. It was a profound, visceral sickness. It felt like they hadn't just insulted my girlfriend. They had defiled something sacred in me. Something I didn't even know I possessed until Maya walked into my life. The shame wasn't theirs. It was mine. Shame that I had tolerated this kind of company for 3 decades. Shame that these boys were the closest thing I had to family outside of my parents. The air grew thick, suffocating. My mind screamed, "What the hell are you laughing at?" I snapped. The silence after my eruption was so absolute it felt physical. I stood up, slamming my bottle down. Stop it, right now. That's disgusting. My voice was a gravelly growl I barely recognized. The laughter died immediately. Their faces, seconds ago contorted in cheap, ugly glee, went blank. Ben looked down at his shoes. Dave tried to say something apathetic, stammering, "Ho, chill out, man, it was just a joke." Just a joke. The four most dangerous words in the English language, the shield of every bully and coward. But I wasn't having it. No, I hissed. It wasn't a joke. It was cruel. And it's not funny, ever. They went silent. The heavy, guilty silence of children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. They left shortly after, the goodbyes mumbled and awkward. The brother had suddenly fractured by an invisible line that had been irrevocably crossed. I stood in the middle of my living room. The echo of their awful laughter replaced by the terrifying sound of my own accelerated heart. And all I could think was, I have to tell her. I felt the desperate, consuming need for absolute honesty. A need that now feels like the biggest mistake of my life. The drive home felt like traversing a landscape that had fundamentally changed. The streetlights glared harsher and colder, illuminating the shame that was crawling up my throat. I couldn't shake the image of their faces twisted in that grotesque, mocking joy. I'd known these men longer than I'd known myself, or so it felt, yet in that single moment. They became strangers, monsters wearing the familiar masks of friendship. They were full of red flags, I knew that. The casual misogyny, the inability to empathize. The way they constantly punched down instead of lifting up. I'd always excused it, chalking it up to immaturity, to just being guys now. That excuse tasted like bile, but the biggest knot in my stomach wasn't in the betrayal of my friends. It was the secret I was carrying. Maya and I, we have a bond built on an almost painful degree of honesty. It's not just a preference. It's a necessity, especially for us being on the spectrum. Lies, half-truths, suppressed feelings, they don't just complicate things. They create static, a kind of existential noise that makes the world unbearable. We agreed early on. We tell each other everything. The good, the bad, the anxious, the ugly. It's what made our relationship a sanctuary. But standing there, keys rattling in my hand, staring at the closed door of our shared space, I suddenly wished I could burn that agreement to ash. I found her in the kitchen, humming softly, making tea. She looked up and smiled, and that smile, the genuine, full-wattage Maya smile, felt like a physical blow. How could I bring the poison of their ugliness into this space? How could I taint her light with their darkness? I debated for a terrifying minute. Could I just omit it? Could I tell her they just had a dull night? But the moment she asked, "How was the hang, John?" You look rattled, the lie shriveled in my mouth. She sees me, truly sees me. And I knew I couldn't hide the visceral reaction I was still vibrating with. I sat her down on the sofa, the same spot where she'd sat earlier. I didn't tell her immediately. I had to build up to it, to frame it with the necessary context, my anger, my defense of her. I told her about the crude, probing questions first, the stuff about our sex life. She frowned, her jaw tightening. They're awful, John, seriously awful. I nodded, grateful for her validation, taking a deep breath. Then came the hard part. The part where I had to articulate the vile, twisted nature of their jokes about her disability. I spoke quickly, trying to minimize the impact by rushing through the worst words. But the moment the words left my mouth, they felt enormous, heavy, and unforgivable. I watched the transformation in her face. It was devastating. The initial frown deepened, but it wasn't anger. It was something far worse, a slow, cold shuddering. Her eyes, usually so bright, expressive, went flat, like someone had turned down the light source behind them. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just retracted. They laughed. She asked, her voice quiet, almost an echo, "Yes, Maya, they did." But I shut them down. I got mad. I told them off. I defended you, honey, I promise. I was disgusted, absolutely disgusted. I reached for her hand, needing that connection, that reassurance that we were still a unit against this sudden external horror. She pulled her hand back gently, almost imperceptibly. But the withdrawal felt like a chasm opening up between us. "You defended me," she repeated, the words tasting metallic. She looked away, staring past me, past the wall, into some distant, painful memory I couldn't reach. "John, I don't need defense. I need acceptance. I need respect." And there it was. The breaking point. It wasn't about whether I was disgusted. It was about the fact that the people I called my friends felt entitled to use her as material for their mockery. She was suddenly forced to confront, yet again, the world's casual cruelty, and this time, it was facilitated by my inner circle. The revelation hit me like a physical punch, and my attempt to be honest. I had accidentally handed her a weapon. that the world had forged long ago. Shame, and she was using it on herself. I just don't want to see you right now, John, she finally whispered, standing up. Her voice was steady, terrifyingly so. I need time. I need to process this. It's not about you defending me. It's about what this says about the world and what it says about the company you keep. She walked into the bedroom and closed the door, not slammed, not locked, just closed. But felt more final than any door I had ever seen. The air pressure in the apartment felt wrong. I sat there on the sofa, listening to the crushing silence. The same silence that used to be comforting, now a deafening accusation. A frantic, icy anxiety began to take root in my chest. Is this it? Is this the consequence of my misplaced loyalty? I had traded 30 years of lukewarm friendship for months of pure, undeniable love, and now, both seemed to be slipping through my fingers. The friends were gone, certainly, but Maya? The thought of her walking away because I didn't recognize the true nature of my friends sooner, because I exposed her to their ugliness, was a suffocating fear. The honesty the first cherished had driven her away. And now, I had nothing but guilt and a terrifying, unanswered question. AITA for cutting them off, when their words are now costing me the one person who ever truly understood me. I stared at the closed door, imagining the emotional landscape. She was navigating a landscape of self-doubt and isolation I had unwittingly pushed her back into. 3 days of living in a purgatory of silence and anxiety. The closed door became a wall of emotional reinforced steel. She was still here, physically, but the light that usually emanated from her side of the apartment had been extinguished. I'd hear the small sounds, the click of the lock when she went to the bathroom, the quiet rustle of the blanket, the measured breath that reminded me she was still breathing, still existing, but miles away from me. It was worse than an argument. Arguments are noise. They imply a conflict that can be resolved, a bridge that can be rebuilt. This was silence, the sound of an irreparable break, the noise of a foundation cracking. My own anxiety, already a low hum thanks to my own place on the spectrum, ratcheted up to a deafening siren. My focus dissolved. I couldn't work, couldn't eat. I spent hours pacing the apartment, stopping only to stand outside the closed door, my hand hovering near the knob. A silent plea for entry. But I knew better than a push. Maya wasn't retreating out of spite. She was retreating for survival. Her confidence, which had always felt like an impenetrable suit of armor, had been breached by the toxic waste my friends had sprayed, and I was the one who drove the truck. I kept asking myself, what did I expect? I was so focused on being honest, on clearing my own conscience, that I forgot the first rule of protecting the person you love, shielding them from unnecessary pain. I felt the guilt like a second skin, thick and suffocating. I betrayed her not by laughing with them, but by exposing her to the laughter at all. I made her pain my problem, transferring the trauma for her to carry because I couldn't handle the burden of a secret. Was that honesty, or was it selfishness? My phone was a dead weight in my pocket, constantly vibrating with text from the group chat. They were oblivious, or expertly feigning oblivion. Dave, hey man, everything cool? You seemed kinda intense the other night. Ben, yeah, sorry about the jokes. Didn't realize you were so sensitive. Mark, it's just Maya. Right, you're getting serious. Don't let the girl dictate the group, dude. The audacity of it made me physically recoil. Sensitive. Dictate the group. They were still framing it as my overreaction, my problem, never their cruelty. They didn't even grasp the magnitude of their violation. That sealed the deal. I didn't need to debate my friendship with them anymore. The red flags I had ignored for years, the constant undermining, the veiled jealousy of my achievements, the casual misogyny, they weren't flags, they were flares, marking the coordinates of a toxic sinkhole I had been standing next to for 30 years. I didn't reply to any of the messages. Instead, I opened the chat with Dave, the one I'd known since kindergarten, and I typed, "We're done. All of us. Don't contact me again." It was a simple, brutal cut. No explanation, no drawn-out fight. Just excision, as I had said. A strange feeling washed over me, a mix of profound loss, the end of a historical chapter, and a shocking, exhilarating sense of relief. The weight of their toxicity was instantly gone, but it was immediately replaced by the heavier, sharper weight of the uncertainty with Maya. That night, I tried talking to her through the door. I sat on the floor, leaning my back against the wood, and spoke softly, like an audio confessional, hoping the vibrations would carry my sincerity. Maya, I cut them off. All of them, just now. It's done. I saw the ugly truth that night, and I realized they were never truly my friends. They were just people I knew for a long time, but I get it. I get why you're silent. I put you in a situation where your self-worth, the thing I love most about you, was attacked. And I didn't stop it fast enough. I'm sorry. I love you. I respect you. Your strength isn't something to be joked about. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Please, just tell me what I can do. Tell me if I've broken this. The silence on the other side was absolute. No rustle, no shift in breathing, nothing. I felt the cold despair start to solidify in my gut. I had sacrificed my oldest connections, the foundation of my social life. But it meant nothing if I had already lost the future I was fighting for. My anxiety was a fever now, making the world swim. What if she's gone? What if the door opens and she's just packed? The suspense of not knowing her decision, of living in this emotional limbo, was more punishing than any outright rejection. I needed her to talk. I needed her to tell me whether my act of defense, however late, had earned me a single, solitary grain of redemption. I closed my eyes. The scene from 3 nights ago still burning behind my eyelids, the ugly laughter, the chilling silence. The ultimate question hanging in the air, was I too late to save the one thing that truly mattered? The 4th day broke, gray and relentless just like the 3 before it. I felt utterly hollowed out, existing on lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline spike of constant worry. My mind kept orbiting the same terrifying gravitational pull. What if she leaves? It wasn't a dramatic fear, it was a pragmatic, logical consequence of my actions. I knew how much effort Maya had put into shedding the weight of the world's ableism. How fiercely she fought for her right to just be a person, not a diagnosis or a punchline, and I, the person supposed to be her shield, had momentarily lowered my guard, allowing the shrapnel of my friend's casual cruelty to wound her deeply. I started seeing the world through a new, horrific lens. Every time I stepped out, every interaction I had, I was hyper-aware of judgment, of people whispering, of heads turning. It was the same relentless scrutiny Maya had faced her entire life. And suddenly, I was experiencing a diluted, secondary version of it. The guilt was teaching me empathy in the most brutal way possible. I wasn't just guilty for telling her. I was guilty for not realizing the toxicity of my friendships years ago, for letting their poison seep into my own boundaries until it threatened to destroy the only genuinely healthy relationship I'd ever built. I found myself meticulously cleaning the apartment, a frantic, mindless attempt to scrub away the metaphorical grime of that evening. I polished the surfaces, not for hygiene, but for penance. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter where Maya had been making tea, when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Tucked beneath a stack of cookbooks was a small, well-worn paperback. It was a collection of essays on the intersection of anxiety, neurodiversity, and relationships. She had highlighted a passage, underlined it with a fine, almost invisible line. Honesty is not a free pass for brutality. It is a responsibility. You must ask yourself, does this truth serve to cleanse your conscience? Or does it genuinely benefit the recipient's peace? My chest tightened, a cold vice clamping down. I dropped the cloth. The sound was loud in the silence. Her words, written months ago, were a direct indictment of my choice. I had told her the truth not because it benefited her peace, but because I couldn't handle the dissonance of the secret. It was a selfish act cloaked in the noble guise of honesty. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. The shame deepened, evolving from simple regret to profound self-loathing. I wanted to scream, to lash out at the walls. But the presence of the closed door, that constant, silent judge, forced me to internalize the pain. Then, the first flicker of hope, or maybe just desperation, occurred. The sound of the bedroom door opening. I froze, wiping my hands reflexively on my jeans. I turned slowly, bracing myself for the sight of suitcases, for the cold finality of goodbye. But she was just standing in the doorway. She was wearing my oversized gray hoodie, her hair messy, her eyes rimmed with the exhaustion of internal warfare. She looked fragile, smaller than I remembered, but also impossibly resolute. She didn't meet my eyes immediately. She walked past me, silent, towards the kitchen cabinet. She pulled out a mug and started boiling water for tea, moving with the slow, deliberate care of someone concentrating on a highly complex, delicate task. I couldn't maintain the silence anymore. It was pulling me under. Maya, I whispered, my voice thick with disuse and emotion. Please talk to me. She poured the water over the tea bag. The steam curled up, briefly obscuring her face. She took a deep breath, and finally, her eyes lifted to mine. They were not filled with fire or even tears, but with a weary, heartbreaking disappointment. You cut them off, she stated. Not as a question, but a fact. Yes, immediately, completely. They are gone. Maya, I ended it. She nodded once. I heard you, John, when you were talking through the door. I heard every word. She took a slow sip of her tea, the warmth seeming to bring a tiny bit of color back to her cheeks. It was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. But you need to understand something. She set the mug down, and the sound of ceramic meeting wood was the loudest noise I had heard in days. This isn't about whether you defended me. It's about what their words did to a part of me I thought was safe. They were laughing at my vulnerability, John. They were laughing at the fact that I exist in a body that doesn't fit their narrow, pathetic definition of normal, and you gave them access to me. When you told me, I didn't feel loved. I felt exposed. I felt like I was back in high school, hiding in the bathroom stall, just hoping no one would notice. Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied it instantly. I needed to pull away to see if I could trust you again, John. Not with secrets, but with myself. I had to know if your loyalty was truly to me, or if it was still entangled in the toxic history you shared with them. Cutting them off was the first step. But the question still hangs in the air for me. Is this the breaking point for us? The answer, she looked directly into my eyes now, and I held my breath, the entire world narrowing to that single moment. The answer is terrifyingly close to yes. Part 5. The weight of the almost her words. Terrifyingly close to yes didn't land as a scream or a threat. They were a surgical incision, locating the precise epicenter of my fear. It wasn't over yet. The precariousness of our existence was suddenly tangible. We were balancing on a knife edge, and the only thing keeping us from tipping was the slim, brittle hope of true understanding. I realized then that my anxiety wasn't about the loss of her, but the profound, agonizing fear of not being worthy of her. I understand, I managed to say, the words catching in my dry throat. I was selfish. I told you for me, not for you. And I let my loyalty to history blind me to their rot. I should have recognized those red flags years ago. The casual cruelty. The way they treat anyone they deem other. I am so sorry I exposed you to that. Maya, I don't know how to fix the feeling, but I know I've chosen you. Every time, always, I didn't move toward her. I stood my ground, maintaining the distance she had created, respecting the invisible boundary of her emotional repair. I felt like a teenager again, standing outside the door of my first crush, utterly exposed and desperate for acceptance. The silence stretched. Now, a fertile ground for possibility rather than a barren wasteland of finality. She took another measured sip of her tea, her gaze drifting around the apartment, lingering on the books, the framed photos of our shared life, a collection of for months condensed into tangible objects. I need to know, John, she finally said, her voice softer now, but heavier. If you truly understand the cost, it's not just a bad joke. When someone uses your body, your reality, as a joke, it diminishes your right to existence. It makes you question every kind word, every compliment, every moment of intimacy. It makes me wonder if, deep down, you see me through their eyes, too. The accusation, gentle yet devastating, hit me where I lived. The thought that she might believe I saw her as anything less than perfect, less than magnificent was unbearable. Never, I stated, my voice husky, my chest tight. Never, Maya, look, I'm on the spectrum too. I know what it's like to feel different, to feel like the world is optimized for someone else. But you are the most optimized, beautifully constructed person I have ever met. Your confidence, the way you own who you are, it's what drew me in. It's what I love. I took a hesitant step forward, stopping short of touching her. That night, when they started laughing, it wasn't just my anger you saw. It was a profound, fundamental shift in my perception of them and myself. They weren't laughing at your disability. They were laughing at my inability to choose something meaningful over something stagnant. They were mocking the love that they were destined to achieve. And for the first time, I felt shame, not for loving you, but for associating with men who couldn't recognize beauty and strength. When it stood right next to me, the vulnerability in my confession seemed to reach her. Her expression softened, a subtle shift in the tension around her eyes. She set the mug down completely and finally, made a small gesture toward me. It wasn't an invitation to hug or touch, but a simple, open-palmed turn of her hand. An acknowledgement. I needed to hear that you realized the choice wasn't just me versus them, she said, her eyes searching mine, testing the sincerity of my gaze. The choice was between your growth and your stagnation. You chose to grow, John. And that's the only reason I'm standing here right now instead of walking out the door. A wave of overwhelming relief washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. The yes was avoided. The breaking point had held. But her subsequent words were a stern warning that tempered the relief immediately. But this is a reset, she continued, her voice firm. The past 3 days showed me what happens when I retreat. It's not fair to either of us. We have to lean back into our honesty, but with a new rule, vulnerability is sacred. Don't tell me a painful truth just to clear your slate. Tell me so we can face the pain together, as a team with a plan. She looked at the abandoned group chat on my phone, which was lying on the counter. You chose me. Now we deal with the fallout together. I'm proud of you for cutting them off, John, truly, but I won't be a secret to your friends. And I won't be a casualty of your history. The weight lifted in that moment wasn't just the fear of losing her. It was the heavy, decades-long obligation to a friendship that had long since curdled into obligation. The silence had ended, replaced by the hard, necessary work of rebuilding. Maya's gaze, though no longer purely disappointed, was watchful. A constant reminder that I was now on probation. I accepted it. I had earned this painful scrutiny. The emotional distance didn't vanish overnight. We were sharing space again, talking, but the ease, the effortless intimacy that characterized our first few months was gone. It had been replaced by a delicate, almost ritualistic care. Every word I spoke, every gesture, felt magnified, filtered through the memory of that night. I was learning to be intentional, rather than reactive. A critical lesson for both my personality and our relationship. The true test of the cut came swiftly. My phone rang late that Friday night. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered, John. It's Dave, look. Man, what the hell was that text? Are you serious? His voice was thick with beer and disbelief. I walked into the hallway, away from the kitchen where Maya was finally reading a book again. A small sign of returning normalcy. I kept my voice low, firm, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. I was serious, Dave. We're done. Over what? A few stupid jokes. We've known each other since we were kids, John. You're gonna throw away 30 years of friendship over a girl? And over that. The casual contempt in the way he stressed the word that, referring to Maya's disability. Their joke, the entire violent incident sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through me. No. Dave, I'm not throwing away friendship. I'm discarding toxic waste, I replied, choosing my words carefully. You didn't make a few stupid jokes. You reduced the woman I love to a punchline based on something she can't control. You mocked her dignity. It wasn't about the girl. It was about the lack of human decency you and the others displayed. And the fact that you still don't grasp that you call that a few stupid jokes is exactly why I'm done. He scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound that was instantly recognizable as the defense mechanism of a threatened bully. Look, man, you're changing. You're trying to be something you're not. She's got you wrapped around her finger. Don't come crawling back when she dumps you for being too intense. The insinuation was painful. A direct strike at my deepest insecurities about being too much for anyone. But the recent anxiety, the days of silence, and the fear of losing Maya had forged a new kind of clarity. You're right, Dave, I said, a chilling calm settling over my voice. I have changed. I grew up. I found someone who values honesty and kindness. And that instantly exposed the ugliness of the company I was keeping. You didn't lose me because of Maya. You lost me because you showed me exactly who you are when you thought no one important was looking. Goodbye, Dave. I hung up before he could respond, my finger trembling slightly as I hit the end button. I didn't block him immediately. I wanted the finality of the choice to sit there, visible. The call was a final severing, a necessary pain. But the moment I put the phone down, I felt the tremors of guilt start to creep in again. 30 years. A history shared. Birthday parties, funerals, scraped knees, and drunken confessions. Was I really AITA for torching all that history? Was I too harsh? I walked back into the living room. Maya looked up from her book. She hadn't heard the conversation, but she saw the tension etched on my face. The sheer effort it took me to stand there, calm and resolute, spoke volumes. Dave? She asked softly. Yeah, he called. It's done. I told him why. She closed her book, setting it aside. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she moved toward me. She didn't embrace me, but she reached out and gently took my hands in hers. Her grip was firm, grounding. John, she said, her eyes warm and serious. The friends who try to drag you back into an old, small version of yourself when you are trying to expand, they were never your allies. They were anchors. You didn't cut them off because of me. You cut them off because you finally valued yourself enough to demand better company. And that, more than anything, tells me you are exactly who I thought you were. Her words were the balm I desperately needed. They didn't erase the hurt, but they validated the decision, turning my act of defense into an act of self-respect. The suspense of the past week, the fear of the breaking point, dissolved slightly, replaced by a quiet, deep conviction. We were scarred, yes, but we were fundamentally stronger, forged in the heat of a crisis that revealed the true nature of everything around us. The story wasn't about losing friends. It was about finding the strength to deserve a true partner. Part 7. Rebuilding the sanctuary. Days that followed were defined by a rigorous, unspoken commitment to transparency. The emotional scaffolding had been ripped away, and we had to rebuild the relationship, brick by careful brick, using a stronger, more resilient mortar. For me, that meant facing the full extent of my past complacency. I started talking to Maya not just about my day, but about my internal world, the anxieties, the emotional processing issues related to being on the spectrum, and how years of suppressing those things with my old friends had led to that explosion of silence. And then, regrettable honesty. I confessed to her the shame I felt for not recognizing the casual cruelty sooner, for letting myself be complicit by silence in years of misogynistic and dismissive conversation. It wasn't just about the jokes directed at her. It was the realization that I had fundamentally tolerated an environment that was antithetical to the values I held, and to the person I wanted to be. Maya listened, truly listened, with the focused intensity that was one of the many things I adored about her. She didn't offer immediate absolution, and I didn't expect it. She offered acceptance of my brokenness, which was infinitely more valuable. "It's hard, John," she said one evening as we sat together, finally touching again, knees brushing lightly. "It's hard to burn down history. But you were protecting a shell, not a foundation. Now, the space is clear. We just need to make sure this new space is truly safe for both of us, that we can." We decided to tackle the immediate external fallout together. The occasional pitted text from a mutual acquaintance, one who hadn't been present that night, but was still tied to the old circle, drew my attention. I had been ghosting them all, avoiding the inevitable conversations, which was the cowardly approach. Maya helped me find the courage for a cleaner break. "You don't owe them an apology," she advised, "but you owe yourself clarity. Don't engage in a debate. Just state your boundary and close the conversation." So, I crafted a single, concise message to be sent to anyone who tried to mediate or question my decision. My old friendships ended because I realized our core values no longer align. Their cruelty crossed an irreversible line of human decency. I wish them well, but I've chosen a path of respect and integrity. And that path doesn't include them. It felt like writing the final chapter of a very long, very disappointing novel. With every send, the knot in my stomach loosened just a bit more. The suspense of being questioned and judged by the periphery of my old life faded, replaced by the quiet conviction of my choice. But the biggest emotional shift came during a quiet moment of renewed intimacy. We were lying in bed, the late afternoon sun spilling across the duvet. She turned to me, her hand tracing the faint lines of stress on my forehead. "You know," she murmured, her voice soft, "when you told me that truth, the awful one, I felt the immediate pain of exposure. But I also saw something I hadn't seen before. I saw you, John, truly fighting for me. That rage you described, the revulsion, it wasn't just performance. It was genuine. It was the moment you stepped entirely out of their shadow and into our light. That's why I'm still here. Because beneath the selfishness of your honesty, there was the undeniable fact of your love." Tears pricked my eyes, the first ones I had allowed myself to shed since that night. The guilt, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, finally started to lift. Her words were a profound act of forgiveness, not for the mistake of telling her, but for the years of emotional neglect I had inflicted upon myself by staying in toxic friendships. It transformed the climax of our story, the argument, and the break from a potential tragedy, into a crucible. We hadn't broken. We had been refined. The inspiration wasn't just the strength of her forgiveness, but the realization that true connection, especially for people like us who navigate the world differently, requires radical self-respect first. I wasn't just building a life with Maya. I was finally building a better me, one worthy of her. The suspense was over. The uncertainty of our future replaced by the solid, unwavering commitment to a shared, emotionally intelligent path forward. the resolution didn't mean the absence of pain. It simply meant the pain now had meaning. The biggest ongoing challenge was the void. 30 years of routine don't disappear because of a principled decision. Every Monday night, the old habit flared up, the unconscious expectation of a text, a call, the familiar, easy rhythm of their presence. The silence on those nights felt like an amputation. I realized how much of my identity had been interwoven with their drama, their superficiality, their constant need for external validation. Now, I had to learn how to exist without that emotional scaffolding, and it felt terrifyingly exposed. I was lonely, truly, profoundly lonely. My social circle had shrunk from a comfortable 5 down to a singular, precious one. Maya was brilliant, but she wasn't a replacement for the camaraderie, the shared history, or the simple familiarity of the group dynamic. My anxiety about isolation spiked. Was this the price of integrity? The suspense of this new, solitary existence was a quiet, internal thriller. I confessed this to Maya. I didn't frame it as regret for cutting them off, but as grief for the loss of a shared past and the sudden vacuum of my present. I missed the easy rhythm, the history, I admitted one night, sitting at my desk, staring at my mute phone. It's the fear of being alone, I guess, that I gave up my whole social life for this one relationship. And if she placed her hands gently on my shoulders, stopping the toxic sentence before it could leave my lips. Stop. We are not a transaction. John, you didn't give up your social life for me. You gave up a bad social life for your own values. And that is a huge difference. She moved around, standing in front of me, forcing me to meet her gaze. You need to fill that space with things that feed your soul, not things that numb it. You and I, we are good at introspection, but sometimes we are bad at proactive connection. Her honesty inspired me to take a terrifying step, reaching out to new people, not as a desperate attempt to replace the lost friends, but as an exercise in building relationships based on true alignment. I joined a local book club focused on psychology and neuroscience topics I genuinely cared about, but had never been able to discuss with my old friends, whose intellectual curiosity peaked at sports scores. The first meeting was terrifying. My social anxiety was a high-pitched whine in my ears, but I was there, and I was talking about things that mattered. The fear of being judged was still present, but this time, it was balanced by the genuine warmth and respect of the conversation. The difference was stark. With my old friends, I had constantly minimized my achievements and censored my deeper thoughts to fit their lowest common denominator. With these new acquaintances, I was celebrated for my intellect and my nuanced perspective. I didn't have to defend Maya. I simply talked about her work, her wit, her beautiful mind, and the respect was implicit. There was no need for the crude locker room commentary, because these were men and women who possessed emotional maturity and respect. I realized the ironic twist. My old friends had always made me feel like the weird one, the overly sensitive one, the one who didn't fit. But it wasn't me who didn't fit. It was their worldview that was too small. By finally choosing integrity, I had, paradoxically, found a community where I truly belonged. The ghost of guilt over cutting off my history was finally laid to rest, replaced by the inspiring hope of a future built on authentic connection. The loneliness hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had shrunk, replaced by a quiet sense of earned peace. My life with Maya settled into a pattern of mutual respect, deepened intimacy, and constant, gentle communication. We were more than just partners. We were collaborators in building an emotionally resilient life. The trauma of the jokes had acted like a brutal emotional diagnostic, showing us exactly where our vulnerabilities lay and forcing us to reinforce the entire structure. The moral of the story was becoming clear. The cost of cutting off 3 decades of history was high, but the alternative, losing the one person who saw and accepted my true self, was unthinkable. Part 9. The ironic reflection. 6 months passed. The silence from the old group was complete. Dave, Ben, and Mark were truly ghosts, existing only as faint memories triggered by a shared song on the radio or a familiar neighborhood bar sign. I noticed I didn't miss them as individuals. I missed the idea of them, the comfortable blanket of long-term history, regardless of how scratchy and threadbare that blanket had become. But every time I saw the peaceful, genuine smile on Maya's face, I knew the void was a necessary consequence of growth. Our relationship was thriving. It wasn't the giddy, high-speed rush of the first for months. It was a deep, resonant hum of mutual trust. We had achieved the level of security we both desperately needed. the kind that allowed our individual anxieties to quiet down without the constant fear of judgment. We had learned to process conflict with intellectual curiosity rather than emotional chaos, which, for the people on the spectrum, felt like mastering a new, beautiful language. One afternoon, I ran into Ben unexpectedly. I was leaving the bookstore. I had just bought Maya a collection of poetry she'd been wanting, and he was stepping out of a nearby fast food joint, looking older, somehow deflated. The shock of seeing him was immediate and visceral. He spotted me, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. The familiar awkwardness was there, but beneath it, I felt a detached sense of pity, a stark recognition of the differing path we had taken. "John," he muttered, his voice flat. "Ben," I acknowledged, my tone neutral. Devoid of anger or warmth, he shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. "So, you're really serious about this, huh?" Cutting us out. "Yes," I confirmed, not elaborating, simply stating the truth. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, man, I get it now. We were jerks. We were just trying to be funny, but yeah, it was messed up. We didn't know how to handle it, you know? You actually having a real relationship. And with someone like Maya, it was easier to make a joke than admit we were jealous, I guess." I looked at him, truly looked, and realized he wasn't offering a genuine apology. He was offering a self-justification wrapped in a thin veneer of remorse. He was framing their cruelty as a product of my success and their stunted emotional state. The empathy I felt earlier evaporated, replaced by cold clarity. "It wasn't about your jealousy, Ben," I stated calmly, holding the poetry book loosely in my hand. "It was about a fundamental lack of respect for another human being. It was about how to use cruelty as a defense mechanism for your own failure to connect. That's the rot I cut out. And the fact that you still see Maya as someone like Maya, a category, an exception, instead of just a person, shows me nothing has changed." He flinched, stung by the directness. The old John would have softened the blow, offered a path back. The new John simply held the boundary firm. "So, that's it then?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine sadness this time, realizing the finality of the severing. "That's it, Ben. I chose integrity. I chose peace. And I chose the one person who saw through all our childish nonsense. I hope you guys find a way to grow up. Goodbye." I walked away, my stride confident, not looking back. The encounter was the resolution I hadn't known I needed. It proved the moral point. The loss of those friends wasn't the catastrophe. The catastrophe would have been staying. The irony was devastatingly clear. By cutting them off for her, I had inadvertently saved myself. I had traded a crowded, suffocating past for an open, hopeful future. I walked back into the apartment, the smell of roasted garlic and basil filling the air. Maya was setting the table. She looked up and smiled, the pure, unclouded smile. She was my sanctuary, my partner, and the mirror that finally reflected the man I was supposed to be. The decision had been agonizing, suspenseful, and filled with emotional risk, but it had yielded a truth stronger than any 30-year history. The ultimate lesson didn't come in a sudden, blinding flash of light, but in the quiet accumulation of small, affirming moments. It came in the effortless way Maya and I communicated, the shared understanding of our neurodivergent minds, and the absolute certainty that in this world, we were each other's safest harbor. I had spent so long navigating the chaos of my old friendships, mistaking drama for excitement and history for loyalty, that I had forgotten what genuine peace felt like. The guilt is gone now, replaced by a deep, settled conviction. I am not the asshole for cutting them off. I was the victim of my own inability to prioritize genuine respect over comfortable routine. My anxiety still spikes. Of course, that's just part of who I am, but now, when it rises, I have a partner who doesn't dismiss it as oversensitivity. Instead, she helps me navigate it, recognizing that my emotional intensity is also the source of my profound capacity for love and loyalty, the same intensity that fueled my furious defense of her. I've learned that the true mark of a person isn't how they treat you when they need something, but how they talk about the people you love when they think you're not listening, or when they think it's just a joke. That night, my friends didn't just tell me who they were. They told me exactly what they thought of my love, and what they thought of my partner's inherent worth. They saw an opportunity for cheap, cruel humor, and my choice to walk away was the only way to safeguard the most precious thing in my life. Maya's heart, and my own integrity. I often think about the moment I told her, the agonizing choice to reveal a truth that caused her pain. It was a mistake, an act of selfish honesty. But if I hadn't told her, the secret would have metastasized, poisoning me, and ultimately, poisoning the relationship with the silence it demanded. I had to face my complicity in their environment before I could truly be worthy of her. The truth was brutal, but it forced the crisis that birthed our current, stronger reality. It was the only fire hot enough to burn down the old life and forge the new one, and Maya, she is magnificent. She has fully reclaimed her space, her confidence, her joy. The event did wound her, yes, but it didn't break her. Instead, it reaffirmed her understanding of true allies versus performative friends. It showed her that I was capable of making a profound sacrifice for her dignity. We are stronger now, built on the solid, unyielding ground of mutual respect. We are a team, facing the world's casual cruelties together, with no secrets and no false fronts. The 10,000 words I've confessed here feel like a necessary purge and admission of guilt for the time I wasted, and a celebration of the love I almost lost. I chose the truth, I chose the high road, and while the path is lonelier, it is infinitely more fulfilling. My history is thinner, but my future is boundless. So, I turn the story over to you, the audience who has walked this agonizing, suspenseful journey with me, through the laughter, the silence, and the profound, isolating fear of loss. I ask you this: if your closest, oldest friends made the woman or man you love feel like a joke, reducing their reality to cheap entertainment, would you have the courage to burn down 30 years of shared history for the sake of integrity and love? Where do you draw the line between loyalty to the past and fidelity to your future? Comment below and let me know. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you question the toxic compromises you might be making in your own life, hit that subscribe button, because true growth only happens when you stop being afraid to choose yourself.